Great, we are live. Welcome to the Bühler Climate Week. This is the 5th and final event in our Climate Week. And we welcome to all of you, not only internal to Bühler, but also external. We have people registered from Mass Challenge. We have people registered from Unitech. We have people from many of our partner networks. We also have other corporates. Welcome to those from Zurich Insurance who have a grassroots movement similar to Generation B. Welcome to also Barry Calabau, who participated in one of the earlier events in the Climate Week. I'm joined here at Bühler with Beatrice and Tom Crowther, and we're also joined online by Isabel and Melati Wijsen. Isabel Melati, can you hear us okay?
Yes, we can. Hi, everyone.
Perfect. Hello. They are calling in from Indonesia. It's fantastic to have them join us. And I must say, I'm extremely excited, and I have been excited for a couple of weeks to do this panel. I think it's probably the most exciting set of panelists I could pull together. We have exciting stories from Isabel Melati and their entrepreneurial spirit and founding a company and a movement at the age of 10 and 12, and where they've gone forward with this. We have Tom, an ecology professor from ETH, but he's far more than your standard professor, and he will talk to you about the global ecosystems and how important restoration is, and his work at the Crowther Lab. And then obviously Beatrice from Bühler, our very own, and she will talk about the Future Food Initiative of Bühler. And the theme here is inspiring examples to climate change. At the end of this Climate Week, we've talked about carbon footprints, we've talked about some of the key issues, and now some inspiring examples. So firstly, I will just spend only a couple more minutes before we get onto the exciting story, just introducing Bühler for those externals and Generation B. So I will start with Bühler very briefly. For anyone who's joining, we are a food, feed, and advanced materials company. And every day we estimate that 2 billion people and 2 billion people are fed and 1 billion people are moved with food, feed, and materials processed on Bühler technology. And then within the Bühler Group, and hosting this event today, is Generation B. Slide, please. Generation B is an internal movement within Bühler. And the purpose of Generation B is to bring people together and create the company that people want to work for. And in particular, we want to protect the climate and develop society by enabling hundreds of global initiatives. This Climate Week is being one of them. And it's great to be able to partner with other companies and invite other companies to share experience and to talk about these topics. This Climate Week is held in the Build Up to Our Innovation Challenge. So hopefully it's inspiring people also to get involved there. So my first question that I have for the audience and for all of you to think about at home before we go to some inspiring stories is, who is worried about climate change? If you're in the audience, put your hands up. If you're live, take the time to think about it. Are you worried about climate change? A little bit? So my second question with that in mind, and for those of you online, nearly everyone in the room put their hands up, who feels they can make a significant contribution to mitigating climate change? So we have some, maybe a little bit less sure. And I think that is really why we have these three speakers, why their three stories are important, because we have three people that have very inspiring stories, journeys to mitigating climate change and to making a difference. And with that, I would like to introduce Melati and Isabel Wijsen. And before you talk about your story, I just want to thank you in particular, Isabel, for joining us, because you joined us and prepared for this panel while you had exams. So my first question for you is, before we hear about your story, how did the exams go?
Good, I passed all of them. Woo!
I hope you can hear the round of applause. I don't know, but there was a round of applause from the room here.
Thank you. Yeah, no, graduation 2020 is definitely different than I imagined. I'm graduating next week officially, so I'm excited. But yeah, it's really nice to come up here and be part of the Bühler community again, because I came last year for the networking days, and today I have my sister here with me, so we're excited.
Fantastic. It's great to have you both. And we have you on a Surface hub, so you might as well be here in this hybrid digital event. So if we're looking sideways, it's because you are here to us in the room. So it's as good as we can get. So with that, I'm extremely excited to hear your story and your inspiration. So could you tell us a little bit about yourselves and tell us your story?
For sure. Well, first of all, thank you again for having us. I think it's incredibly exciting to see how technology is bringing all corners of the world together. Us joining in here from Bali, I don't know if you can see, but we are definitely using a little bit of the computer light. We might get some candles on the table a little later as we're on the other side of the time zone. But we're really, really grateful to take part in the panel. I think one thing that makes us excited, especially in our line of work with seeing and working with companies, but coming and representing the younger generation, is when we see companies really take to heart the importance of climate action and really putting that in the centerpiece of everything they do, every decision that they make. So thank you, Bühler, for everything that you guys are doing and for including us in this panel this week. And with that, we'll start with our story.
Yeah, so a little introduction to us, I guess. My name's Isabel. I'm 17 years old, and this is my older sister, Melati. She's 19. But our journey with activism really started about 6-7 years ago when I was 10 years old and she was 12 years old. And, you know, we started here on the island of Bali. Oh, there you go. We've got more professional lighting now, hopefully. Sorry, where was I? We were born and raised on the island of Bali, you know, in a house completely surrounded by nature in the rice fields 100 meters from the beach. And so being a part of the environment was always a huge part of our upbringing. And I'm sure that when you guys hear, you know, Bali, Indonesia, I'm sure all of you guys, you know, picture this postcard perfect paradise almost, you know, Bali, the island of gods. You know, we've got the mountains, we've got the sea, we've got the ocean, we've got everything beautiful. But another side to that reality is that Bali can also sometimes be considered the island of garbage, right? It's not rocket science to see that garbage is a problem and plastic pollution is a problem, not only on Bali, but all around the world.
And I think also to just paint a little bit of a picture for you, for us, when we started traveling around the world, we would see systems in place where, you know, waste management meant that at 6 a.m. a truck would come and pick up the rubbish bins along the street. So no trash was literally in sight. But here in Indonesia and growing up on Bali, which is an island so immersed with nature and not having that waste management structure set in place, we were seeing plastic ending up in places that it shouldn't. If we would go for a walk, we would see plastic in the streets, in the gutters. When we would go swimming in the ocean, there would be plastic in the water. And so we were really worried about this problem. And we're not going to spend too much time and attention on the problem, because I think also what this week is really about is empowering the solutions forward, because we know the facts. We know that plastic pollution, single-use plastic, is only, you know, being used for 30 minutes and then thrown away without the consequence or necessarily acknowledging where that away is. So what was our solution? Well, at 10 and 12 years old, from that picture that you saw at the very beginning, that was our first day on the mission. We were super excited, and we created
Bye Plasticbags, which today has actually become an official, can you guys still see the slides? It's okay. An official NGO run by young people on the island of Bali to say no to single-use plastic bags. Now, the reason we started with, you know, I'm sure all of you guys understand when, you know, having solutions, starting with a small realistic step is definitely a good way to go, because, you know, plastic pollution is a complex and big issue. And we saw that countries all around the world took their stance, their first step against plastic pollution by banning the single-use plastic bag. So we thought, you know, hey, 6 years ago, easy peasy, lemon squeezy, let's do it, let's start. And we had that passion and pure intention to save the island of Bali.
And the way it really worked, you know, is that we didn't have a business plan. We did not have a strategy thought out. And our parents will tell you there was also no budget involved. But there was just this passion that my sister and I had. You know, we came home from school and we started putting paper out on the living room floor, and we started, you know, brainstorming. We just really started with that. And we made a list of what all the problems we felt our island home of Bali was facing. And what we felt we could do was tackle this issue of plastic pollution, narrowing it down to even more the plastic bag. So you see something that started from pure passion and with the right values and this big vision. That's really where the birthplace of Bye Plasticbags started. Today, one of our biggest and most proud accomplishments is to say that we have about 50 teams all around the world in 29 countries, led by other incredible young people who are saying no to single-use plastic in their local areas.
And I think this is one of the most coolest parts of, our line of work is seeing other young people, seeing what we do and getting inspired and taking action. And it really showed us, that we're not alone on this journey. There's so many incredible people all around the world, young people, especially whether it was, even primary, middle school, high school, university students out there and willing to take, their time to really go out there and make change happen.
But one thing I also think that this has really taught us is that there is not one solution that will fix it all. Really it went from a case by case, from understanding the level of awareness to the level of willingness at a political level to enact change. And this was something that we really learned and saw the bigger picture of how Bye Plasticbags could be a living example that kids can do things. And that statement even went more serious when just last year, finally, after 6 years of hard work and campaigning, Bali finally banned single-use plastic bags, straws, and styrofoam. So it took so much time. If you would have told 10 and 12-year-old Melati and Isabel that it would take 6 years of time, energy, motivation, we would have never believed you. We thought we were entering into a summer project, and 6 years later, here we are, nearly 7 years. It took a lot of time and it took a lot of people from all levels of society to work together. And I think that's where we really learned the power and the importance, no matter if you're working in plastic or sustainability or any sort of sector, collaboration and the importance of co-creation always had to be present. But you might be asking yourself, well, where are we bringing our time and attention to? What is next? And that's really what we've been working on for the last several months, especially more intensely, is how to keep people motivated with the climate crisis, with the environmental injustices that are happening, social injustices that are happening. But more importantly, with our work after the ban came into place, we were maybe doing 3 to 5 events in person a week last year when it came into place. And when COVID-19 happened, we really had to shift our strategy to going more online, to really keep the engagement level that we had, which was relatively high, not only with young people, but with individuals, CEOs, general managers. And that's where we introduced campaigns like the Climate Lockdown Challenge or the #ActivistAtHome Challenge, where we really tried to enable and share tasks or tips on how to be an activist from home, whether that's finding out your resources of where you're researching, or the importance of composting, agriculture. All of these little tips we did on a lockdown challenge that lasted about, for example, 14 days. And each day the participants joining would get one eco task that we knew they could complete in the comfort of their home. So keeping in and acknowledging the situation that we're in with COVID-19, but not forgetting the bigger potential here of keeping the momentum going on the climate crisis. And throughout this journey, I think the last message on what we're focusing on right now, completely now that we're almost both graduates of high school and entering a new space in our life. One thing that Belle touched on a little earlier was the fact that we don't feel alone. Oftentimes, I think especially when we started, when it was so rare to see other young people on the internet or on the island, we thought, where are all these other young change makers? And through our work, we've had the privilege to speak to over 75,000 students in all sorts of different classrooms. And some of you may have heard of young change makers from all different levels. Some of you may know Greta. Others may know Malala. There are some of you that may know Shitezkat, and others that know Boyan Slat. The point being that there is a generation that we are a part of that is on the rise. We are just unstoppable. No matter what corner of the world we are coming from, we are finding our passion and our place in the world. And we know that there are many, many more. One thing that when we were interacting with these students all around the world, no matter if it's Tokyo, New York City, or sometimes even getting on an island, on a boat to get onto one of the islands here in Indonesia, kids would ask the same question. They would come up to us in lines, refuse to go back to class, and ask us, how can we do what you do? And that's really the birthplace of our new story and our new project, Youthtopia. This is really where we bring young people together and we learn and share from each other. We bring young frontline change makers, use their real life examples, build it into a program, into a masterclass, you could say. And that would then go out to reach and empower the rising young change makers. So that's what we're working on 24/7 as full-time change makers from here in Bali. And I think with that, our 10 minutes are up. So we are incredibly grateful to be taking part of this panel further on.
Wow, what a fantastic story. And I think great inspiration for all of us. And I want to just go back to this topic of utopia before we move on to Tom and Beatrice. But what's maybe one or two key things that you would want people to take away from being part of Utopia?
I think definitely as a young person that there finally is this headquarter space, this central space where you can really feel like you're a part of a community, of a bigger movement that can really enact change in the world. And I also think that there is that sense of collaboration. So young people coming together to teach each other. And that's really where the peer-to-peer mindset or peer-to-peer learning is one of our biggest philosophies at Utopia.
I think also, though, if I can just add something, the power of Utopia is hopefully that young people can go there, who want to be change makers, who want to be activists, but they don't know how, and they can come to Utopia and learn those skills, find their own voice. Because in today's world where everyone has their own opinions, everyone, can share that with one click of the button on social media, how can you use your voice to do change, to inflict good? And I think that's definitely, hopefully, Utopia can help facilitate that for other young people around the world.
Very cool. And is this something that will be global as well?
Yes, I think one of the things we learned from Bye Plastic Bags is the power and also the mobilization that we have as being part of the younger generation. We're able to connect with all corners of the world much more easily than before. So Utopia will be global, and we already have 50 teams around the world, which is an easy plug-in for us to, facilitate these networks of young people around the world.
Very cool. I have 5-10 questions in the back of my mind, but we're going to have to move on to other speakers. We will welcome questions from those of you online and those in the audience. So please think of your questions. And I think with this idea of global change and thinking globally, it's a good time to look at Tom, your work. Tom, an ecology professor from ETH, but as I said, no ordinary professor, and I think some of the work they're doing is really cool. And I will let Tom tell you more about it. Over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jay. And thanks so much. I always love coming to Bühler. It's, the feeling of sustainability being infused into the agricultural movement is just the most inspiring thing. And I just love hanging out here. I'm going to admit that my talks normally have a lot of interactive slides. And so if we don't have a clicker, I might have to go a bit off script, but maybe we can have the first few slides. Our lab is ultimately founded on this idea that, we are all aware of these global threats of biodiversity loss and climate change. And the UN has huge conventions on climate change and biodiversity loss that are ultimately separate entities, separate organizations of people. But through the research that we're developing and finding, we're becoming increasingly convinced that by restoring Earth's ecosystems, we have a really tangible and powerful potential to impact on both of those global threats. So to come to the basics, this is the state of the global carbon cycle. So we've got a very, very thin atmosphere, and every year we emit 10 gigatons of carbon into that space, just so we understand the scale of the system. So as a result, we've got about 300 gigatons, which is constantly increasing, constantly ticking up through time. Now, the slide is not quite working, but that's okay. This is okay, it doesn't matter. I think let's leave the slides maybe. The consequence of this is that we're obviously accumulating all of this carbon in the atmosphere, and it's obviously driving climate change. Now, one of the things that has famously regulated, our climate and our atmospheric balance over the last thousands of years is clearly our environment. Each year, humans are emitting 10 gigatons, but Earth's ecosystems absorb 120 gigatons, and they release 120 gigatons. This is a massive system of a massive scale. And obviously, as we deplete those ecosystems, we're starting to tip those ecosystems in favor of more emissions than offsets. And so that's the really concerning thing. You know, relatively small levels of anthropogenic emissions are having devastating consequences on the ecosystem fluxes. So we're interested to start to tip the balance in the other direction. And very simply put, that requires restoring ecosystems, restoring vegetation, which are capturing carbon from the atmosphere, and then storing that carbon back in the Earth's soil. And that has the potential for, given the scale of this system, massive scale contributions to carbon drawdown. So while we need emissions cuts urgently, we also need this powerful carbon drawdown to offset some of that 300 gigatons that's in the atmosphere. But the major challenge, the major hurdle that we've been dealing with for the last few years, decades, has been that we've fundamentally known this for a very long time, but there's been two things getting in the way of it. We first haven't had any idea about the scale of the challenge. So we don't really know how many trees exist on the planet, how many there might exist, and how much carbon they could capture. And then the second challenge is that we don't know how we as individuals engage in that fight. So when you go back into the literature, you see that there's a large history of characterizing ecosystems, mainly from satellites in space, which told us previously that there's about 400 billion trees on the planet. But again, that's based purely on imagery from space, which has fantastic global coverage, but it can't tell us what's going on below the surface. So we've essentially developed a next generation approach built on the work of millions of people on the ground, evaluating their ecosystems, counting the number of trees, measuring the size of those trees and the species of those trees. And then you pair that up with the satellite information, and you can build this next generation of models using machine learning and artificial intelligence to predict tree density across the planet, where we found that there's about 3 trillion trees that exist on our planet. And that information alone was enough to have the UN's billion tree campaign scaled up to the trillion tree campaign. But at that point, it was still a bit premature because we weren't entirely sure exactly how much room there is available for new trees. We know we're depleting trees at a devastating extent, but we don't know what's physically possible or how much carbon could be captured. And that's when we realized last year that there's this potential using this same modeling approach to evaluate the environments that might support trees. And by building that scale of model, we're able to map where the Earth's ecosystems would naturally exist. And that's given us a whole new insight into how this system works, because it revealed that there's about 0.9 billion hectares of degraded land around the world. Now, that's land that is not used for urbanization, not used for agriculture, and it's not existing forest. It's places where forests would naturally exist under today's climate conditions, but they don't because of former human land use. And the exciting thing is that in that 0.9 billion hectares, we find that there's room for about 1.2 trillion new trees that would capture a staggering 200 gigatons of carbon in those ecosystems, both in the vegetation and in the soil below that vegetation. And when we launched this information, everything in our world exploded. I don't know if I can't imagine anybody in this audience has missed the amazing peak of energy and enthusiasm that there has been for tree restoration in the world's media. There's the Trillion Tree campaign has been launched. The UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration is all built around this idea of restoring Earth's ecosystems, getting it back to its natural state, whilst also maintaining the functionality of ecosystems for humans. But there's really, the explosion of energy was really exciting, and we saw thousands, literally thousands of restoration projects dotting up around the world where people are engaging in restoration, planting trees, restoring their ecosystems. But it also raised a series of dangers, a series of threats. Because when we're talking about this scale of management, there's obviously huge threats to getting it wrong. And one of the initial concerns that many people have is that this might distract attention away from the very real need to cut emissions. And so obviously the first and foremost point to get across on this topic is that restoration is one part of a holistic solution to addressing climate change. We urgently need those technological solutions to cut emissions, but restoring can act as that additional carbon drawdown component. But the other threats involve things like how we manage the ecosystem wrong. So many times the wrong trees are restored in the wrong ecosystems and they die and degrade the ecosystem. Or commonly what we see is big business comes in and goes, great, I see that it's good to plant trees, and then they just trounce the world in monocultures of pine trees or eucalyptus trees or palm oil even. And these monocultures are far more devastating than the previous degraded land. Planting a monoculture of any of these species not only destroys the biodiversity across the planet, but it's also absolutely unsustainable and not very good for carbon storage either. So really you lose all of those benefits. And possibly the most important consideration is that many times, very often the biggest challenges in these restoration efforts is to make them socially responsible. It's, when we tell you that trees can be an incredible carbon drawdown solution and climate solution, people think, brilliant, we'll just go and buy up a lot of land and plant a lot of trees and we're good to go. Now that often, in many cases around the world, is not only sort of socially irresponsible, but it's not sustainable because you're essentially buying up an area of land and excluding the local community, which means that not only are they losing their resources, but they're also very likely to subsequently come back and just cut down those trees and use it for their land use as most of us would in many parts of the world. What we see is that restoration can be incredibly powerful when it's done in combination with those local communities, when it's empowering those local communities, not just through the funding that comes to those communities, but via the ecosystem services that natural regeneration works and sort of provides. And we're seeing now this whole new next generation of projects that is all networked through local communities. These are the communities that are driving restoration, that are making it happen. And they're getting some funding from it, but more importantly, what they see is that the ecosystem gets revitalized. So in places that were otherwise too dry for farming, you see when you restore some trees nearby, moisture gets trapped in the soil and organic matter accumulates in the soil, and then suddenly the productivity of the ecosystem improves and farming flourishes and really does well. And there's thousands of examples like this where people are harvesting nuts from and fruits from the ecosystems or medicine types from these regenerating ecosystems. And so it's only when we are really truly socially and ecologically responsible we see the immense power of this ecosystem regeneration, and it has the potential for massive scale impact, not just for climate change, but for biodiversity loss and humans across the globe. And that's the kind of global movement that gets us really, really excited when we incorporate those learnings and build on them to make it a success. Now, Abdul, I wonder if it's possible to skip to the penultimate slide. Because all of these learnings that we've developed over the last, these are decades worth of learnings, have all led to the development of our sort of new organization. What we see is this can be the machine that takes these learnings and builds them into this global restoration movement. And by doing that, what we see is that we'll be able to take every one of those failed restoration projects and turn it into a success. In fact, we don't take one failure and turn it into one success. We take one failure and turn it into 50 successes. And then that project grows. So this is, you can see on the slide here, our basic idea for this organization, Restore, which we've just about to launch this year, which brings together this global ecological information so that people can see not only how many trees exist across the planet. If you click through the slide, you can also see which species of trees are supposed to exist. You can see information about the microbial community below those trees. And more importantly than that, we also can see the restoration projects across the globe, which you can now, as an individual or as an organization, begin to invest in and monitor. So if we click on one of those restoration projects, you'll see an immediate summary that project, identifying where it is, a bit of the local features, but more importantly, it'll tell you about the species that need to be restored, the carbon accumulation that can take place there, and the social and ecological impacts that restoration can have, so that you and I and everybody can start to have that real connection with this global restoration movement. So it's not just a top-down UN dominated system. This is now a bottom-up movement where every one of us can engage in this very exciting movement. So that, I think, summarizes where we've got to, and I think it's incredibly exciting to be here with Bühler talking about how we enable this global movement. So thanks.
No, I think that's a really cool message to finish on, this idea that it's not a top-down thing. All of us as individuals are responsible, and we can all contribute, which I feel is a very similar message also to what Isabel Melati also said, that we can come forward and we can act as well. Now, I'm privileged that I also get to do a little bit of work with Tom, with Bühler. And I just want to ask you about one additional topic, which I think is interesting for some of the other corporates who might have joining. Some of the consumer foods team are here as well with us in the room, in particular chocolate. Can you tell us a little bit about agroforestry, which is well, tell you what, why don't you tell us a bit about agroforestry?
Right. I mean, that is a great topic of conversation, because through this Restore platform, what we're trying to figure out is how we enable people on the ground to engage in restoration. And it can be through the production of foods or medicines. It can be through the conservation of societal rights or social dynamics. But one of the most powerful ways to incentivize restoration is through this thing called agroforestry, where agricultural systems that are otherwise productive and providing livelihoods for people can be complemented and implemented with restoration strategies. So you can restore trees and diverse mixtures of species in amongst those agricultural settings. And what that does is it first improves biodiversity. It provides carbon, increased carbon capture, which can also be an additional service to the people managing that land, that you can sell those carbon credits and really benefit. But what we're incredibly excited to see is that in many parts of the world, including that local biodiversity, actually increases the productivity and the yields in those systems. And so we're doing a lot of work to try and figure out where and how and when that takes place. Well, at the moment, we've done a massive scale study across West Africa in cocoa plantations, and we see that about 30% of tree cover in those cocoa plantations tends to be the optimal for cocoa yield. And obviously that varies in different parts of the world. So if it's very, very dry, then a little bit more tree cover is valuable. Where if it's very moist, then a little bit less tree cover. But ultimately, now, not only are you restoring biodiversity and carbon, but you're actually incentivizing the value of ecosystems to maximize productivity, increase yields, and increase the services for humans nearby. So I honestly see this as probably our most exciting avenue for global scale restoration.
Very cool. A win-win.
Yeah.
Again, many more questions that I could ask, and we welcome questions online and at the end from the audience as well. But I'd like to move on to our final speaker, Beatrice. Now, Beatrice, I'd like to start with current affairs and the current pandemic that we're facing. And my question for you is, how has the pandemic that we're experiencing changed the food industry, and what are the key learnings we can take out of that? And then with that, if you could tell us more about the global food system and some of the future trends that are worth looking out for.
Thank you, Jay, and what an inspiration that we had until this point. But we cannot ignore that we are in the middle of a deep, deep crisis that has affected us all with a lot of pain and suffering. And it's more than a crisis. It's more than a health crisis. It's a socioeconomic crisis. We see also the vulnerability of our food system. And it's not a coincidence that we see this food system cracking at the points where we have huge sustainability issues. It's the animal food chain. Also, we see the issues of food insecurity, and not only popping up in the global south, also in the global north. People just not having enough income, no purchasing power to buy food. So we see really the food system being very, very fragile. And maybe that is the wake-up call that we need at this point to address the even bigger challenge, which is the climate crisis. So there is definitely a link. And if there is anything positive that we can take out of this, because there is a lot of pain and suffering, it's difficult to look at it from this perspective, but we should. The crisis is too deep to just go on with business as usual. And we should reflect our whole system. And food being one of these key aspects, very much reflecting the other side of what Tom has been talking, his natural systems that he wants to restore and preserve. And what are we doing with the rest, growing food? And that is the aspect that I would like to address with my impulse presentation. It's all about, when we talk about future of food, it's all about the question, how do we feed 10 billion people on this planet in a sustainable way? That's this question that we need to answer. And there's no silver bullet answer. We see climate crisis, which is already affecting our food system today, and we might not be so aware of it. Yields going down, for instance. There are simulations showing wheat, for instance, up to 6% yields going down with every degree C of global warming. Water being much more contaminated with microorganisms because they react exponentially to temperature. We see cocoa plantations that are now going up to higher altitudes because of the heat increasing. And we see much more contamination with the mycotoxins, so these very poisonous contaminants that come from fungi that infect our crops. Also with the very toxic ones like aflatoxin. So we also need to be aware that the agro-food system is a big contributor to the climate crisis, with 25% of the greenhouse gases coming from the agro-food sector. More than 70% of the fresh water extraction is for agriculture, 1/3 of the energy going into this sector. And at the end of the day, 1/3 of the food lost or wasted. And Tom has talked about biodiversity. And if you see the other side of the coin is that we rely today, basically, you can say for half of the calories on this world, on 4 crops. That's soy, maize, rice, and wheat. And the 2 first, we're mainly feeding to livestock. We are not even consuming it directly. We are using 2/3 of the agricultural land to produce just 1/3 of animal protein. So it's a very inefficient use of land. And on the other hand, as we realize, our hunger for meat and seafood is creating a bigger disaster. You know, that these superbugs that are resistant to antibiotics due to the overuse of antibiotics in livestock. So in fact, we are breathing our next pandemic if we go on with business as usual. I'd like to focus also on the topic of land. Usually we are not aware that land is one of the biggest bottlenecks when it comes to finding a solution to produce more food in future for more people on this planet. So you see, you know, what we have as land that we could use. We use around 3.3 billion hectares for agriculture. And on this land, we grow crops that we feed then to livestock. So 62% is then fed to livestock. So if you fly over land, which I hope you're not doing anymore, we should not be flying, but think that, you know, 60% or more what you see is to feed livestock. And this is just delivering 17% of our requirements for protein, the animal proteins. So definitely we need to make the system more efficient. And if you look at the Land and Food Use report, which is a very interesting report, in fact, the big challenge is how do we produce more food using less land so that we have more land to restore nature? And I think that is the challenge that we need to answer. There is where we need to come up with solution. And obviously we have already, if we think of the losses and waste that we have, if we improve that part, that is food that we could be directly consuming. So this is a topic that we are addressing with our Future of Food initiative at Bühler, but together with our partners, with our customers, with academic partners, startups in our whole ecosystem. And it boils down to the topic, how can we increase protein diversity, linked to also biodiversity? In that sense, also, how can we profit from a more diverse sources of protein? And by the way, also, this has to be more transparent so that we can make also better choices. Pulses are a big opportunity which are today underexploited. As our income increases, typically, the societies reduce the consumption of pulses, although pulses are in all cultures. But there are many other things like nuts, a wonderful supply for protein, a very healthy snack in that sense, that we can leverage much more. Also, many of us like to eat meat or drink milk, although some don't even dare to say that. But we have the opportunity to provide viable alternatives to meat and dairy, but where we don't need to sacrifice, taste and enjoyment of these products. So these products definitely need to become better. That's where science and technology can help us. We need to make the animal food system more sustainable, because animal food, I'm convinced, will still be with us. It has many reasons, why. And this is a personal opinion. We can discuss it also later, why this will still go on. But we need to make it more sustainable. For instance, upcycling of waste to produce feed, to feed fish and poultry, leveraging insects. And also leveraging new single cell proteins out of microalgae or bacteria to produce protein. I always say the field of the future is the tank, where we can grow these single cells using fermentation and producing protein without competing with arable land, which Tom would like to contribute, restoring. And the ultimate vision is also, obviously, through these tanks, even produce cell-based meat or dairy proteins without needing the animals. And this is what we can do as a sector, leveraging science, technology, and collaborations to come up with the solutions. But at the end of the day, it's about the consumer changing the diets, and also all of us as individuals making a contribution, reflecting about the importance of our diet. Thank you very much.
I think it's really cool to the way you broke down the land use, and to think every time I fly home to the UK and I look over these fields, 2/3 of that journey is crops going to animals. That's quite an interesting way to look at it. But I have a difficult question for you, Beatrice, that I think everyone is thinking in the room. Does this mean that we all need to turn vegan? Do we need to cut out all these products? What should we do next?
May I ask the people here in the audience, who is vegan?
We had no hands there for anyone.
We have no hands popping up.
What about Isabel Melati? Are you vegan, vegetarian?
Yeah, I'm a vegetarian already for, I think, 6 years, sorry. And Bella is?
I'm like 80% vegetarian. I'll have I'll have only meat if like my dad prepares it really nicely, and it's like for, I don't know. Yep. But 80% vegetarian.
I would say you're a flexitarian.
Yeah.
That's the term that we use. So we say, mainly vegetarian, occasionally still meat or dairy.
Yeah, I think I'm with Isabel. I'm vegetarian until somebody starts a barbecue and it becomes very difficult, and I have this conflict in my head, and I don't know what to do. And but maybe Beatrice, what's something else that we could look at?
So we should really not impose what is the right diet. It should be something where people can really make intelligent and informed decisions on what to consume. I think it's a very, very personal decision, and there are many reasons for going vegan. Obviously, it's apart from the whole sustainability aspect, also the ethical aspect. So we should not forget that side. In terms of sustainability, we can make a big impact without necessarily, all going vegan. It's an option, it's open, people can decide, but it's not necessary that we all go vegan. If you look, science has done the work, and it's also not surprising to see what would be the ideal diet if we take just the average, what we're consuming today, and how we should be shifting our diets. And let's assume that we are all consuming an average diet on this world, which is obviously not true. But if we would all change our diets to consume whole grain products rather than refined products, if we would double the consumption of fruit and vegetable, if we would double consumption of pulses and nuts, and half our consumption of red meat and sugar, we could have this planetary health diet. And this planetary health diet is a diet which is good for us people as health, keep us healthy, and good for the planet. So we need to think in that terms. What is a good diet? Not only for me as health, but also good for this planet. And both are equally important. Let's not forget that 20% of the premature death occur due to poor diets, high energy, low nutrient diets. And this is also very unfortunately we are seeing with this COVID crisis. Those who have already preconditions very often due to poor diets are the people most likely really to have very, very severe effects and even dying. And this is the aspects where sustainability, our ecological sustainability and the social sustainability come together. So I would say we don't all need to go vegan. By making intelligent choices, we can make a huge contribution in sustainability. But if we would all go vegan, we can say that the land that we have and the proteins that we produce today on this land, it's this 525 million tons of protein which grow on the field, would be enough to feed 10 billion people. I think that's also an interesting reflection.
Very good. So, Isabel, I think the conclusion there is there's hope for us as flexitarians, which is very good news. I just want to sort of comment on one thing that I think is really special amongst the three speakers, which I think is also quite rare, is that we have three people looking at different problems, all relating to climate change and society, but from global perspectives. Isabel Melati looking at a platform to enable more global change makers. Tom looking at the global ecosystem and regeneration, and Beatrice commenting on the planetary health, not just we need less meat or something like that, but the planetary health. And I think that is three really interesting and unique perspectives to bring together. So it's really fantastic to hear the three presentations sequentially. So I have some questions here from the audience. Please do continue to write in. I'd like to go back to Indonesia on virtually, of course. And this question is to Melati. During what critical challenges did you face along your journey? Which were the critical stages for you? And how did you overcome them?
Yeah, there were many challenges. It's just as much as we had so much opportunity, there were a lot of challenges, and some to name a few. Being teenagers on the front line, there was long-term motivation when we didn't see change happening fast enough. That was often a challenge we faced and still do today. I think also one of the biggest challenges for me personally is I remember the time when I would go to government meetings and have to sit there and navigate the space of why change wasn't happening fast enough. For me, that was a frustrating challenge, and the way that I overcame it, I'm not sure if I have overcome it, to be honest. It's a learning process, and I'm still learning. But one thing that I've kind of found I cope best with during that challenge of meeting with government officials and that frustration of change not happening fast enough is just by leading with example. And I think that that's what we've done with Bye Plasticbags. We didn't wait for anyone else to start the movement. We didn't wait for permission. We just went ahead and did it. And I think that through leading by example, I think what the younger generation does really well is walk our talk. And I think then change happens faster that way.
Yeah, no, very cool. Very humble as well. And I think going from this idea of leading by example, Tom, we have a question for you here. What's the best approach for individuals to plant trees, and what are your recommendations?
I love this question because it's a bit different for everybody everywhere in the world. But ultimately, at the highest level, I see there's three ways to sort of engage in the movement. And remember, it's not just about planting trees. We always say restoring the ecosystem. So that might be just put a fence around it and let it regenerate itself. And that's often the best. But the three sort of levels of engagement generally are, do it yourself, and that could involve put a fence around, block off the sheep from that area and see what regenerates, or it's restore the native species in a diverse mixture. So that's again one of the, we're building this restore platform so that everyone everywhere knows the native species in my garden are this, and this is how fast I would accumulate carbon. The second level would be to sort of donate to one of these thousands of projects, really tens of thousands of projects around the world who are urgently in need of funding support, financial support, and just your engagement. And so, really with the click of a button, you'll be able to donate to any of those projects. Just, a $1 can convert into a tree that can be then sustaining whole ecosystems of species. So I think that's a really exciting avenue. And the third one, which I've been increasingly getting into in my own experiences, is just thinking about your investments, whether it's in, your food consumption practices, or or the things you buy, or literally your financial investments. If you intentionally focus your efforts on the organizations that are having a positive environmental impact, or at least minimizing their negative environmental impact, I think we can really start to shape society and shape markets to shift the whole global community in terms of a sort of nature-based environment. So I really think there's, three levels there that everyone can engage with at different levels of difficulty, but all would have tangible impacts.
Very cool. I agree about looking at the way that you behave as a consumer. It makes you think. And I guess that's the next question that I have here. The question was originally, how do we make sure that increased carbon capture doesn't make people think that we can now just pollute the atmosphere? So I'm going to let you take that one first, but then I'm going to ask also Beatrice, Isabel Melati, this idea of how do we make sure that people understand that we all need to contribute, we all need to do something to mitigate climate change. So Tom, maybe you could start with this idea of I've done my offset, it's not my problem, and then we can hear from Isabel Melati about how do we make sure that everyone knows.
Right, and that question raised is probably one of the key components of getting this message right, because it is true that there is, we often get asked, if I've planted a few trees, do I not need to cut my emissions anymore? And I think this is more a mindset change that we all need to take on board. Addressing climate change will never be addressed with one individual solution. It's a systemic, holistic change. It's going to involve the ways we the ways we use energy, the ways we purchase things and consider our purchases. It's going to involve the way we interact with the environment and our food production and everything. This is a thousands and thousands of solutions problem. It's absolutely not one or the other. And it's really that question, that idea that, I've turned off the lights so I don't need to plant a tree, or I've planted a tree so I don't need to buy sustainable agricultural products. That is a false dichotomy that does not need to exist. And in fact, what we tend to see in societal behavior is that when you engage in one, you tend to actually be more likely to engage in the next. You plant a tree, you generally feel good about that, you feel positive, and it tends to lead you to be more positive and sustainable in your purchasing and in your food consumption and in your energy use and in your transport. And all of those positive feedbacks can really feed back through society to try and, hopefully that can sort of spread throughout society to be a really sustainable movement throughout all of our activities. So they're just certainly not mutually exclusive, as I guess my quick answer to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Not mutually exclusive, I think, is the takeaway. But Isabel Melati, perhaps you could give us your thoughts on that. I did watch your TED talk, and I listened to how you hunted down the airport manager in Bali, and I thought it was quite inspiring. But in general, how do you make people aware and feel like they could be part of the solution?
Yeah, I think this is something we get these questions a lot, especially from the young people we interact with, if they want to get involved with Youthopia or if after just listening to what we do. And I think that there's a key missing element of connection. And this is something that we see and experience in, kids all around the world. One thing that I think we were really lucky with, we had that strong connection with the environment. We grew up getting our hands in the soil, feet in the ocean, and really built that strong connection. So I think being able to find a way that we can create that story or that way to relate. But I also think that what we're talking about also taps into the education system, where there is a massive gap in connecting students to real life, stories, to real life knowledge. What is happening? How can we expect to motivate our students if they don't have an education that is, educating them on the current issues and current problems in our world? I think that that's really the role that we want to play with Youthopia on, making sure that we're giving the students a platform to learn about those problems, but not only that, learn about the direct ways they can act towards a solution and towards a world that we're proud of. So I think it's a few things. It's the education system as a whole is outdated and not keeping up with the development we want to see. And young generations, we have that ability to accelerate change. But if we're not giving that platform 7 hours out of a day, 5 days a week at school, where are we supposed to get this motivation? That's where Youthopia then comes in, to kind of plug in that spice for young people around the world. And I also think it's just generally this connection that we need to build stronger. And what I hope actually during this time in quarantine or in isolation, we're actually reflecting a lot on how we need to come back in a world where we have more respect to nature and we feel that connection once again. So yeah, those would be my two biggest points on how we get everybody on board.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better.
Oh, go on.
I definitely think, just like making people aware, and especially with the younger generation, often it can be very overwhelming to see all of these issues, and it's just about understanding and, being able to relate to the idea that you can do something. So, creating change in a fun way. It doesn't always need to be so serious and doom and gloom, We can get creative. We can do, activism in dance, activism in art, activism in this, and, tie in all different ways to get creative and think outside of the box and, just become innovative. And I think that's definitely, a nice way to keep everyone involved, the normal people, who are maybe not everyday full-time change makers. And that's how we can really pull them in as well. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think very well put. And we're towards the end of the discussion, but Beatrice, maybe if you have any last comments on the same topic.
So I can only underline, awareness starts with the understanding and the important role of education. And education not only in the young age, it's our whole life where we need to educate ourselves. So we should all aspire really to understand. For instance, do you know your footprint? Calculate your footprint. Reflect your footprint. Only when you do this, and there are these simple calculators, you will realize, the way how you live, where you live, what you consume, what you purchase, how relevant this is. And this is part of the awareness. Also in the whole food sector, we need to become much, much more transparent. It's all about really having our life cycle analysis done and understanding the contribution at each point and what we can do as an industry, but also then as individuals. Today, we are used to seeing, for instance, the nutritional information on food packages. Some food packages, you can see it also with some plant-based beverages, also the one which we have here, also has the carbon, the CO2 footprint. So I think we need to also understand what it means. I know quite well what I can do with $100, but what does it mean 1 kg of CO2, 100 kg of CO2? I think we need to understand these numbers. That's where we all need to become more educated, and that would arise also the awareness on the contribution that we can make.
Yeah, I think it's a good call to action, actually. Do your carbon footprint. I measured mine last year, actually, for the first time. It was after Sunny Verghese said at our networking days, measure your carbon footprint, publicize it, and make promises to reduce it. And I'm about 23 tons of carbon per year. And I was really surprised how much flying contributed. It's about half, which is quite incredible. So I really need to think about how often I go home to see some of my family, and these things, they need to come into the decision. So we're towards the end, but I want to squeeze in one last question for all of our panelists. I guess perhaps it's a takeaway message or a last minute inspiration. But if you had a theoretical billboard that everyone would go past and see, perhaps on their drive to work or something like that, what is one message that you would put on that billboard for all of us to take away? And I will start by the look on Tom's face. He looks like he's thinking about it. So I'm going to go to Isabel Melati first.
Oh my gosh, there's so many messages that we could share. So we're definitely on the thinking hat like Tom, but I think definitely just off the top of my head, what really came in, which is a very simple 3 words. I think as a young change maker, there's so much frustration that change isn't happening fast enough. So I think the 3 words that we would do, simple message, is take action now.
Take action now. Thank you very much. Tom?
I mean, you have asked, that is the hardest question anyone can ever ask. I'm preparing my TED talk for next month, and I still haven't even decided what I'm going to say for that. But yeah, I think mine might be that when you look at like self-help videos as an individual to self-help yourself, they ultimately all get summarized by have a vision and a dream, and don't let failures hinder your progress. I believe that ultimately, you know, those don't work for everybody, because the vision and a dream, not everybody has a vision and a dream. And don't let failure get in your way. It's kind of difficult if motivation's a challenge and if all these things are a challenge. But I genuinely believe if we all share this vision and a dream, and I do think everyone in this community, everyone listening online, and millions, billions of people across the planet do share this vision to enable this sort of sustainability movement and a climate change movement. If we can take on that vision, the more we learn about this, I would say that we can learn from our past failures rather than shaming the people that have failed in the past or the industries that have failed in the past. Instead, learning from those failures and them can mean that we can have an absolutely monumental impact. I genuinely believe that every single failure can be the information that provides the tools to make 100 successes. And if we can just do that systemically across the globe, I genuinely think we've got an incredible potential for positive impact.
No, good. I completely agree with the message. I think it's a long billboard, but I would definitely still do it.
Yeah.
We've got take action now. We've got Tom's bit.
Have a vision. Yeah.
And I'm still thinking. It's really a difficult question.
Yeah.
And I also, very often we reflect, what can I do? And we probably all struggle a little bit. But I would ask, what are you doing with your work, for a better future? Let's think, through our work here, we spend a lot of time working in very, very different roles. We can, create impact in a very synergistic way. How can we fill this with a purpose for a better future? And I think there is, for everybody who is doing work, there's big impact that we can create, so that we don't think making a better future is just something that we do in our private lives. It's something that has to be, a continuum into what we do every day. And in that sense, we will have more motivated people, projects with more purpose, more drive, more impact, and things really getting done.
No, very good. I think we need to find a space in our cubic for 3 messages at the end of the Climate Week, which would be good.
I think do it now summarizes all 3 of them, to be honest.
Take action now.
Yeah.
No, it would be good. Abdul, can you skip to the last slide just as we conclude? Very good. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you, firstly, to our speakers. It's a real privilege for the company, for Generation B, and also to sit here with you guys and listen to these examples with such passion, inspiration, such a strong mindset to global thinking and really making change. So although virtually it's difficult, it's one of the most difficult things to do virtually. A round of applause, but certainly, at least from the room, thank you very much to our speakers. And as I mentioned, in the build-up to our internal innovation challenge, where we actually also invite external collaboration, Generation B has organized this Climate Week. And here, I was asked to take my face off the slide, but it's made it on there. This is the team that put this together. And it's not just these guys. Generation B was something that was started in the company 3 years ago out of the One Young World network. And I just want to say thank you to every member of Generation B who's helped support this. And in particular, in this instance, the Climate Week team, Abdul and Yasmin, who came up with this concept 4 months ago. And we've had a lot of support and a lot of great energy. And it's a real privilege to be a part of this Climate Week. And hopefully this has inspired you, if you're external, to measure your carbon footprint, to take action now, and internally to maybe solve some of these challenges within our innovation challenge. And I think with that, you can reach our speakers on different platforms, LinkedIn, social media. So if you do have questions that I wasn't able to ask them, then please get in touch. Please provide feedback. I think we all know how hard it is making a change, and any positive feedback is always helpful. So I encourage you to reach out to the speakers. And then lastly, I finish on an inspirational image here, the Go Green initiative. One of the problems with going hybrid or going digital is that you don't get as many good photos from the event, so we wanted a takeaway. So I think we will have this, and we will have the billboard messages, and this is our Go Green initiative, where we had people from all over the world take a selfie or take a picture of them in green to show that this is a topic that's important and a visual reminder of the importance of mitigating climate change every day. So with that, Isabel and Melati, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to speak to you, and I'm sure we'll be speaking again in the future. And Tom and Beatrice also, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.